Welcome to Beyond Rockets. Hope you're having a great day. My name is Clark Dunn and I'm your host. Get ready to enjoy some awesome conversations from Huntsville locals about cool work they are doing right here in the Rocket City. You can connect with us on social media at Beyond Rockets, and if you're interested in doing a podcast yourself, I'd love to hear from you. You can visit my website, beyondrockets.com today, or connect with me on LinkedIn at Clark Dunn. Sit back and enjoy this episode of Beyond Rockets. Well, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of diving into what the last few years has looked like. I think you originally came on, we were discussing off air about 3+ years ago. So it's crazy because it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has. Mm-hmm. For those who maybe haven't seen your first episode, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, my name is Jordyn Brummett. My husband and I own The Vessel, which is a community pottery studio here in Huntsville. And so our studio offers one-time experiences, 6-week courses, as well as memberships for independent artists and creatives to come work.
Yeah, and so when we first had you on, it was probably right before you opened your location at Stovehouse. Talk a little bit about those few years there. So it was kind of this new concept, hadn't really had sort of hey, is this something that other people are doing? It's fairly new, kind of your first big venture.
Yeah.
Kind of to own your own thing and have that space. Talk a little bit about that journey and that process.
Yeah. Well, how much time do we have? I'm just kidding. So yeah, it was that time period was definitely a whirlwind. That's usually what I describe it as. We went from I have this idea to it's happening, and we pulled it together really fast and then had a really amazing response to it. I remember, when I was sitting down with you the first time, it was before we had opened. We were trying to get some traction for our Kickstarter. So we were trying to fund this idea. So that was our first test of, do people believe in this vision? Turns out they did. And that was really exciting. And then, we opened, and like I said, just a really great response. I remember starting with just a few classes a week. And then we got to the point within the first year and a half, we were to the point where we were running out of room for everything, honestly. We were running out of room in our schedule, in our space. We were getting really creative. Where can we put these pots? And so pretty quickly we knew that what we were offering was well received and we needed more space for it.
Yeah. And so when you got that space at Stovehouse, how much of the build out process were you able to be involved with to design how many the layout, you've obviously learned a lot at Stovehouse as far as how much the community is invested into this, what is actually needed to support this, to meet the the overhead, all the costs that go along with it. How much of that build up process did you have kind of a hand in, and then how much of that kind of was a learning process that now with this new move that we're going to be talking about, where you're able to really design what is the community looking for, what is best used, and how can we best optimize this space?
Yeah, the first go around, we were working off of very little knowledge and understanding of what our space really would need. So we were pretty involved in it, but we were just taking our best guess. We did our research on what we saw elsewhere in other states and countries that were doing something similar. And so we were just best educated guess on what would work best. And also my time in community studios elsewhere in college and whatnot. So it worked well, but we really learned if we did this again, we would do this different. We would do that different. We need 4 times more storage than we thought, And
so those few years at Stovehouse, as you kind of really started to see a year and a half in that hey, this space we've outgrown what we ever imagined. What was sort of the main seller, the thing that most people were being involved with? Was it the classes? Was it the memberships? Was it or was it really pretty evenly spread amongst the services?
As far as our offerings, I would say most people were new to pottery. And so our one-time experiences were always full. They were notoriously hard to get into. We were booking 8+ weeks out at a time with our one-time classes because they were only offered on Saturdays because our schedule was full with courses. And we also needed to leave a little bit of room for our members. And so I would say our one-time experiences were what most folks were interested in simply because most of Huntsville's and surrounding areas were not sure what if pottery was their thing or not. And it's definitely something that people see online or on TV and they're like, "Oh, I would love to try that one day," but it's not a super accessible hobby. And so yeah, most folks were interested in just like getting their hands on it and seeing what they thought. And that translated to a lot of people saying like, wow, this is really cool. And then our courses, our 6-week courses were always very full as well.
Yeah,
And so,
I would assume a lot of like if you got that first introduction course, you fell in love with what you were doing.
mhm,
Sort of the next best fit was to do
mhm.
the 6-week course, and then you would hope then at that point they say, "Hey, I want to have a membership on a semi-regular basis to come in here, do things, and kind of have this outlet to like create."
Yeah, yeah, for sure. One of the interesting things that we learned quickly in that space, though, if you go back to, I'm sure if you go back to our podcast conversation 3 years ago, I was saying one of the things I'm most excited about is our memberships. And we quickly learned that our space we couldn't bring that vision fully to life in that space. It just didn't allow for it. Our demand was so high for our classes that it began to really shrink the amount of time that members could get in. And so we had to really limit that offering. Only a very small amount of members could even be there. And so that was something we learned about our small space as well.
Yeah, and so remind me when you first started this business 3 years ago, or you I guess even just opening the door at Stovehouse and having this, this real space that you can now do the creation. This was your full time kind of like you were doing this as your kind of, hey, I'm all in.
Hmm.
And so has your husband now been all in with you now moving forward? And because he wasn't in it all like full time with you when we had that first conversation.
Correct. Yes.
Kind of talk about that opportunity, because that's something like my wife last 2 Septembers ago, September of 24, joined me full time, and so 2025 was the first full year,
Oh, amazing.
and then now we're kind of on year two, and so it's and I like being there and seeing what that like feels like, and like
Mhm.
the opportunity, and kind of knowing like, hey, I think this is the right time. Like, what was that moment like? Because it can be a scary moment because you're like,
Absolutely.
okay, I think I have, if like I think y'all have 2 kids maybe,
Hmm.
and so it's one of those like, okay,
Risk.
it's not just the two of you, it's
Yeah.
it's the four of y'all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, to bring that story full picture, when I came to Jared, over 3 years ago and was like, "Hey, I have this idea and I really want to pursue it." He was actually quite resistant to it at the time because it felt like a big risk, that he was not sure. And I really believed in the timing, the vision. I was like, I think now is the time to pursue the venture altogether. But yes, at the time he was full-time working,
Mm.
which was he had concerns around like, do we have the capacity? Because I'm working full time. And we had two very small children at the time. And so there were valid concerns there. But we went for it and it went well. And so, yeah, fast forward about, I guess it would have been almost a year ago. We were starting to explore the idea of moving and expanding. And then he worked for the government, and in the last year, there was all the opportunities for deferred resignation. And so the first one came up, and I was like, Jared, like, this is the time. Let's go for it. Like, this is your out. But we didn't have any prospects currently lined up for moving.
Yeah.
We had explored Lincoln, but we were like, it's not the right time. We'll wait. The second opportunity for deferred resignation came around.
Now.
And at the same time that came about, um, Wesley Crunkleton reached out and said, "Hey, are you still interested? I think we could make this work." And so the stars aligned. It was like we had this opportunity for him to transition out of his career nicely, as well as a very real option to move and expand on our hands now.
Wow.
And
And so
so,
that was about a year ago when like the official like, hey, I think we're gonna make Lincoln Mill I think we're gonna make Lincoln Mill our new home, and your husband's going to go full time and kind of being a part of the business.
Yeah, the timeline's fuzzy, but within the last year for sure. Yes. And yeah, the risk, I mean, he's very risk adverse. So, he had to really, really think about it.
Yeah.
And we balance each other well because I'm the visionary. I'm like, we can do it. Risks aside, let's go. And he's like, well, hold on. We have a family.
Like, let's whiteboard
Yes.
this for a second
Yeah.
and let's like actually like break down what this looks like.
Yeah.
So Lincoln Mill is going to be the new home of the vessel, which is super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a very long time. I had an office there. That's where we did the first podcast. Had walked by your space that's now going to be your space. The sign's now up. It's this kind of your vision's coming to reality. Talk about getting those keys for the first time and then knowing what you knew about the community, what they were looking for with the vessel, the growth you've had, and, coming into this, blank canvas.
Mm-hmm.
This is a space that you can kind of do with it what you please.
Mm-hmm.
How did you what was that first, like, hey, this is what we need to do? And like, how quickly did the ball start rolling?
Yeah, oh gosh. So the journey to Lincoln, it's honestly been a full circle moment because, over 3 years ago when I had this idea, I loved Lincoln.
Yeah.
I
think we had that conversation like
Yes.
either off air or on air.
Yeah.
We're like, I would love to be here too. I was like, it's a great spot. I think it's a great time. And then it just like all these things.
Yeah. So at the time, the amount of square footage was it was too much to take on. It would have been the wrong move at that time. Because we just couldn't know what we know now. And so we needed to find a smaller location to start out in, test our concept. But yeah, when we went through the whole process, it really was a whole journey throughout. But when we finally got those keys, it was a very surreal moment, and like standing in that wide open space with all that square footage, it was just like,
how much more square footage is it compared to the Stovehouse location?
It is almost 4 times the amount of space. It's not quite 4 times, but it is almost 4 times the amount of space. Now, we had to add in bathrooms, and we have a giant kiln room, and that's amazing. So the actual working space is not 4 times the space, but yeah, it was a lot of square footage to work with compared to what we had been in. And it was just so exciting because, like I mentioned a little bit ago, one of the things I was most excited about was the memberships, because really the heart behind what we're doing is giving a place for people, yes, to explore creativity and pottery, but to connect with other people and build a community. And while that happened to a degree in our first space, for sure, this space, I just knew like there's so much potential in this space and so much space for our members and students, to where that community can really begin to like grow and blossom, and just so much potential. All the events we can host in there and all that.
Yeah, and it's such a cool, like, just the development itself, just the amount, like, Wesley has done a great job of kind of curating a group and the tenants itself in the entertainment spot with Salt, with Turbo, now with y'all. Coin Co-working. I'm really good friends with Will, and kind of their concept. I see there's a lot of collaboration that could be with them, especially with, people paying memberships to have an office. Well, like, hey, going to High Point, going to do like, there's this huge community that's just like right there waiting for you. So you get this, you get the keys. It's 4 times the size of Stovehouse. Like, that's insane. And you start this build out process. We're recording this mid-January. Episode should be out February timeframe. Kind of how did, obviously construction takes time, permits, all the things that go along with, having this dream, this like, hey, this is what the space is going to look like, to then actually starting to see the space come together. Kind of where do we sit now? Like, what does the space look like? What is sort of the timeline, the time frame to, cracking open the doors and inviting the community in?
So we got through the construction phase really quickly, actually. We started the build out process back in October. No, before that. But we finished in about October, the construction. and our equipment decided to take a very long time to get here. And so we've really been in the waiting phase of all that. We are actually technically open right now
Okay.
at Lincoln, functioning. We're running our classes. We've been open for a week and a couple days. It has felt like much longer than that. But we originally had hoped to do a big grand opening, but didn't because our student wheels arrived the night before we were opening to our members, and then welcomed our students in 2 days later. So it was a really last minute. Our equipment got in just in the nick of time. And but as far as like a big opening celebration, we're hoping to do that after our first semester in the space, to allow us to kind of get to know the space, make our finishing touches, and also it's kind of a celebration of the growth. And so we wanted the space to also, it's an added perk that the space will be a little bit lived in. People will get to walk in and see like, oh, look at all the members work on those shelves, and we can have student examples. And so yeah, we're hoping to do that in the next like 6 to 8 weeks or so.
Awesome.
Well, that timeline's a little off, but after our first semester.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if it's, it's hindsight 2020 is always kind of, it's easy to look back now and say like, oh, I wish I would have known this. Is there something in particular as you've gotten this, new location up and going? You've been in the business now going on 6 years, 5 to 6 years now. Is there something that you were like, okay, if I could have known this, if Jordyn could have known this when opening the doors at Stovehouse, that like everything would have done a little differently? Or do you think, what you knew at the time you knew it was probably, was all you really needed to know to get going?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm really happy with the journey we've gone on. This is actually we're going into our 4th year. So it actually hasn't been that long.
Wow.
But yeah, I think there have been really hard lessons learned along the way, but when it comes to the business side of things and the concept, I think, I had this conversation with Jared before we opened, and he was like, I wish we had more data to go off of. And I was like, this is one of those concepts where we're just going to have to open and get the data as we go, because there's no mimicking this concept in a micro way. Like, you kind of just have to take the plunge with a community studio. And, sure, I could like offer pop-up workshops in the community before having a space, which I did. That helped, along the way to kind of get that data. But, yeah, I think even like a community pottery studios exist around the states, exist around the world, but they're not in Huntsville. And learning who Huntsville is as a community, what Huntsville is looking for, what they want. I wouldn't have done it any other way. I think I love that we started at Stovehouse. I love all the lessons we learned and how creative we had to get in a really small space that allowed us to do things at a really manageable size. And it really has like made this transition a lot more feasible, and it's still a lot and overwhelming at times, and there's growing pains for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if someone is listening and they, it's obviously it's nice. I think of, my wife and I's relationship in the business is very much visionary, kind of thinking like, let's just go for it, we got this. To like her, like a little bit hesitant sometimes, and like sometimes she's like, I trust that you got this kind of thing. If someone's listening and they have an idea, maybe their spouse, significant other is kind of like, I don't know, maybe maybe more stable. What advice, what piece of what lesson learned would you be like, hey, if do this or think about this, or whatever it might be to like get the ball rolling, because like momentum's everything. And I think if you can have these ideas, you can kind of sit still and you can kind of think, you can dream big, but until that ball starts to get going, you get some momentum. There's really nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
How do you kind of get that ball rolling, or what would be your advice to get that momentum started?
I think I can remember being in the phase of I have this huge dream, and wanting to talk myself out of it, like maybe in 10 years. But I remember being coached on like, what is your aspirational dream and goal? Like, if failure was not an option, if money was not an issue, what would that dream be? Write it down and now walk it back a few steps, and what is feasible today? What is one small step you can take today? Because if you are fixated on this big vision, which is great, and I get that. I get the fixation. It won't leave you alone. But it can get frustrating if you're like, oh, well, I have 2 toddlers at home. I can't do that. But finding one small way to take a step towards it, whether that is reaching out to someone in the community who's in a similar field and just asking questions, having a conversation, or if it's, for example, with my vision, I knew I wanted to teach clay to our community. What was one small way I could do that? I could partner with a coffee shop and host a small workshop, to just get my feet wet, make some connections, and also on like you have that dream and vision because it's who you're wired to be. So like taking little steps towards that is just going to fuel you as a person, but also like help you get closer to that vision. But yeah, I mean, if that dream keeps knocking, I think listen to it and find one small way you can take a step towards it, because it can be paralyzing to be like, well, I can't do it all, so I guess I just won't do anything.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to I think it's okay to fail. I think it's okay to pivot, have this idea, this big grand thing, start doing it in these small steps.
Yeah,
realizing that like maybe the logistics around that big dream are a little off, and then being okay to pivot a little bit. Like
for sure.
You could have thought when you started doing it, and you might have that like, hey, you like you said. You thought the memberships were just going to be like, this is it. This is going to be other things are going to be great, but the memberships, it's like, well, the space is not really adequate, like this perfectly fit to support that. Okay, well, that's okay, but we are sold out on this. We were doing so much of this, like that's okay. Like let's pivot and let's invest more in that area, so that one day, as we sit today, in 2026, which is crazy to think about, that now you have the space and the means to do memberships on a whole different level. Yeah, I mean, I think I think Huntsville's too is like, as you find these things and you pivot a little bit on this big idea, this big dream. Huntsville's a great community to kind of be invested into that. Like, if you can get out, you can show yourself on social media, you can connect with other businesses, you can kind of share your idea with the community, and they're pretty receptive to either be interested in something like that. And so, I mean, as you've gotten yourself out in the communities kind of want to get itself back into kind of learning more and being aware of what's going on with the vessel. Where can they connect? Where can they find out more information and be involved with what's going on with you?
Yeah, we have a wonderful website full of lots of information that you can find everything we do there. There are edits being made, so as we adapt to our new space, but our bread and butter of our classes and courses and memberships, it's all there. We're on Instagram and Facebook. You can find us there. And as far as where you can find us physically, we are at Lincoln Mill. So
awesome. Yeah, and we'll be sure to have links in the episode notes, links to social media, website, all of that. We'll also have a link to the first episode we did. So if you want to kind of see, us change and kind of the conversation be a little differently, hear a little bit more of the backstory on the idea and kind of how this all came about, and a little bit more about Jordyn, we can go from, we'll have links to that, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Beyond Rockets. Don't forget you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and on YouTube at Beyond Rockets. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Beyond Rockets to stay up to date with new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.